In my last video, I talked about an article that called out an anime for being sexist, and in this one, rather than talking about any specific series or medium, I wanted to talk about the so-called discussion about what they like to refer to as problematic aspects of media. Recently, it seems as though the latest target is specifically Japanese media such as video games and anime. One thing I find most interesting is that these are people that will usually bend over backwards to defend the sanctity of other cultures, including ones that have no problem treating real women as second-class citizens, but for whatever reason it's okay to impose and criticize Japanese media through a Western lens when they deem it problematic to fictional women. In fact, some of them say they're all too comfortable doing it. They say, we just want to have a discussion, and there's nothing wrong with a discussion in and of itself, but to be quite frank, I don't think it's a discussion that holds much value, but they do have a right to express their opinion. They say things like they don't want to ban anything, they don't want to take anything away from anyone. I don't really buy this anymore, and I'll tell you why. Now, perhaps not everyone who subscribes to this ideology is like this, but if all they wanted was a conversation and to discuss ideas freely, they wouldn't need mass media outlets to validate their opinions. There are many places to have these discussions, and they've been having them for a long time now on places like Tumblr and other discussion forums. So to act as though not having their discussion take place on larger outlets is somehow preventing them from having said discussion is a poor argument. Let's be real here, the internet is one giant soapbox for people to express their political opinions freely, and there is no shortage of places to do it. There is an end goal in mind here. They say that end goal is calling for a larger variety of media, but have these people ever looked at the catalog of video games and anime available? There are hundreds of thousands of different titles, and if you haven't found something that appeals to you, then you probably aren't looking hard enough. If you somehow did scour over every single title available, and nothing appealed to your interests, then perhaps it's time to move on and make peace with the idea that this hobby just isn't for you. Anime and video games aren't really even a genre that targets one specific demographic. They're full of subgenres with stories and characters that will appeal to just about anyone. While there may be common elements in a wide variety of them, not all of them follow these cliches, and again, if you believe they do, you probably have a very surface understanding of the mediums. Not all anime and games contain fan service or sexualize women. Some anime sexualize men, but at the end of the day, no matter who is being sexualized, it's fiction. Another problem I have with criticizing this media with a Western and or feminist lens is that, again, you're trying to apply the real-world standards of your culture upon a fictional story in which Western and feminist standards probably don't even exist. So, of course, you're automatically going to come up with issues to complain about because the story wasn't created from the perspective of your worldview. It's also under no obligation to do so. Treating fantasy as though it needs to uphold real-world standards is the truly problematic perspective here. I would even take it a step further and say that this outlook is unfair to the many female actresses, animators, developers, writers, and musicians that willingly create and take part in these projects. I thought freedom of choice was one of the greatest goals for women, so speaking as though people who support these things are sexist or suffer from the mythical internalized sexism removes the agency of women whose life choices differ from your own. People may say they don't want anything changed, but I beg to differ. They know the end goal of their criticism is to get developers and creators to think the masses want change. This is why they want popular websites supporting them. Since large media outlets have taken to parroting this garbage as though it's fact, they're more likely to believe the majority feels this way, when in reality it's a handful of parasites with the right connections. Previously, this was thought of as some sort of tinfoil conspiracy theory, but we've already seen this happen a handful of times. Take Dead or Alive Extreme 3, for example. This game was passed up on a Western release because Koei Tecmo was given the impression that it wasn't wanted in the West thanks to a variety of Western media outlets decrying it as sexist. Media outlets and the perpetually offended try to portray these opinions as though they represent the ideals and desires of the masses, but this is simply not true. This is a very specific vocal minority who are overrepresenting their beliefs to create a world which more closely resembles the magical, diverse reality they've created in their mind, where every other person is an oppressed minority. Anime and video games are already diverse. This is demonstrated just by looking at the plethora of options available to you. But they've planted a seed into the minds of impressionable individuals, and in this society where everyone is so quick to be on the so-called right side of history because no one wants to be labeled as a racist, bigot, sexist, or whatever other ist they can come up with to browbeat people into submission, they've created the perfect scenario for this ideology to take root and spread like an untreatable cancer. They're choosing terminology that will manufacture outrage, claiming a game is perpetuating rape culture, calling it sexist, or labeling it as sexual assault. They use these labels to appeal to the emotions of their audience because, contrary to their belief that rape culture is rampant in society, the default position in reality is to be against these concepts. People that are easily led can be influenced by anything, but with maturity usually comes the ability to reason and differentiate between fantasy and reality, to recognize that what you see on the screen doesn't work in real life, and that once you turn off the TV, you're back in the real world where different rules apply. Overindulging in anything is unhealthy for the mind, but to act like this is the common experience is flawed. People have been falsely led to believe that they're being triggered simply by watching an anime or playing a video game that depicts a character in a way that social justice has deemed problematic. They say they are interested in diversity, but that diversity is only limited to sexuality, race, and gender, the very things most sane people have been taught their entire lives not to judge by. Diversity of thought is far more important than inconsequential aspects that do not determine a person's opinions. Yes, personal experience helps to form how we grow as individuals, but assuming someone must think a certain way because they can be lumped in with a specific community is truly prejudiced. Anime and video games are already diverse. If you believe they're not, then you're willfully ignorant to the reality before you. If fans are losing support of the outlets that were once great purveyors of justice in nerd culture, then perhaps it's time they use their own voices to speak up. If you want to see certain games or titles brought to the West, organize and write to your favorite companies. Tons of emails should hold more power than a handful of poorly written articles that are nothing but insults to the companies and artists that create and work hard to bring beautiful, creative, and sometimes just plain weird products for people to enjoy. Consumers should be free to enjoy a product in its purest form, the way a creator intended. To allow such a simple right to be taken away is to give up on your personal freedom, because once you give an inch, people of this nature want to take a mile. In the past, I may have even thought it was a bit too much of a conspiracy theory, but as time goes on, it is becoming more and more apparent that there is an agenda at work. This doesn't stop here, it's really only the start, and if more people don't stand up and say enough is enough, then you'll end up losing out on far more than fiction. Thanks for listening. I'm the only